So I'd like to welcome everybody to the CMMC Strategy Implementation Monitoring Session. We're going to talk about some of the environment that's going on with this kind of new requirement that the federal government's throwing out there. Marcella, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Marcella Denniston. I am president and co-founder of Cyber Lantern. And we actually are going through CMMC strategy and implementation ourselves. So we are right there with everybody who's having to work through this right now in learning and trying to figure out what's the best strategy and implementation.
And I'm Paul Wirtz. I'm president of the Atlanta chapter of AFCEA, recently retired from AT&T after 27 years. And we're both involved with the smart cities environment or the ecosystem, trying to see how these new federal requirements are going to hit. So you want to go ahead and get started on, I guess, the first slide?
There we go. So I think we set up a poll for everybody. And I think we really just want to have an idea and make this a little bit interactive from the perspective of understanding what everybody's concerns and questions are around this. But ideally, we're going to talk a little bit about who's been impacted by this, who needs CMMC, and what exactly does that mean, right? So the people who would be impacted by the CMMC, it's basically anyone who has a DoD contract, and it really doesn't matter what size your organization is. So it's really a significant impact across the entire defense industrial base community. The benefit here is just that there are obviously different levels of the CMMC, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. And luckily, I think most organizations, from what we're seeing, are only really going to have to abide by a level 1. And so it'll be slightly easier than organizations that are more tied to classified or sensitive information. But there definitely will be an impact across the entire organization. Paul, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think you're right. It's going to impact every federal contract out there. Some of the the discussions going back and forth is, well, what if I don't have data, or what if I don't store it, or how do I touch it? It really is going to impact everybody that has a federal contract. So if you're getting money from the federal government to perform any kind of services, you're going to have some level of CMMC certification. In the past, they used to let you self-certify, and they found out that either people were misrepresenting themselves or were ignorant of the process. So the government kind of stepped in and said, we're going to formalize this process, have a third-party certifying agency come in and make sure that you have processes in place and documented.
Right, and I think the other thing to note here on that last bullet is there's a pretty clear delineation that there's also supply chain involved here, right? So even if you are a supplier to a larger organization that is providing DoD contracts, this may also impact you as well indirectly. And what that means is that potentially these larger contracts that you may have subcontracts through may come down and actually ask you to provide specific policies or implementations or strategies that you may be utilizing in order to maintain security on your end, right? And so this has all been incorporated from DFARS already, which is something that has already previously existed, but as Paul said, really only required you to do a self-authentication or a self-certification that you were following, right? So we've deemed that that's no longer enough, and that's why the Department of Defense is now implementing a much more rigid strategy. So we mentioned levels here, right? And it will differ just depending on what type of organization you are and what kind of information you're dealing with. I'm gonna try to expand this a little bit, see if I can get it to be a little bit better for you guys to see.
And while we're talking about this, we're kind of assuming a lot of people have some awareness of CMMC. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. There's a lot of moving pieces with CMMC right now. So there are going to be questions at every level.
Right, and do we have anyone here who's not aware of what level they would technically be impacted by, or any specific questions around the different levels?
There you go. Carter gave it a softball.
All right, thanks, Carter. So right now, the funny thing is there's not tons of differentiation between the CMMC and NIST 800-171. In fact, because there hasn't been a significant definition yet for the CMMC and what that's going to look like from the accreditation or certification process, the indication that has been provided to most defense contractors is if you are at a level 3, right, which is the managed good cyber hygiene level, which is where most defense contractors who have a significant amount of sensitive data will have to get certified at, then they're basically telling you go in and follow NIST 800-171 in order for you to be prepared for what the CMMC will bring. And really the differentiation there is going to be that the 800 is what you will use as a guidance to implement the security controls or plan for the security controls. And the CMMC itself will actually be the assessment or accreditation, right? So there's an accreditation body who's responsible for training all of the people who will be providing the assessments to the DIB environment or the DIB companies. And then from that point, the CMMC, the actual certification process, is directly tied to a lot of those implementations that you're seeing in NIST 800-171. So if you're already doing that legwork, or if you're trying to become prepared, that's really your first step, especially if you believe you need to be at level 3 or above in this case.
Yeah, and the accreditation body, or CMMC AB, they did a lottery and started the training process for some accreditors. The first 25 are out there, and they just have done kind of a feedback to refine the training process. So you're seeing those first guys that are out there looking at implementing the process. So there really isn't at this time, there isn't a cost delineation. It's just going to be how big a company are you, what levels you require, and what kind of documentation you've got to produce. So the cost is going to be internal to your organization. It's not really a like a fee that you get a certificate from.
Right, and you can see here as well the level controls, right? So there was a question about 800-171 here. So really, if you fall into levels 1 to 3, which means you have moderate threats or below, the 3 things that you want to focus are the CFR 52-204-21, the DFARS, and then the NIST 800-171, right? And this is a very risk-based approach. And so that's really the expectation of implementation here. And basically, they want to ensure that you have all of your assets inventoried and a perimeter around your defense so that you can actually protect those specific assets. Now, when you start looking more at the levels 4 through 5, which obviously is for organizations that are a little bit more involved, this is where you're now going to go a little bit beyond the NIST 800-171 and go into the 171B or 172. And this is more threat-centric, a more threat-centric approach. And also requires more of a zero trust methodology, right? So in that sense, you're going to be looking at having to implement micro-segmentation, a lot of different access controls that maybe you don't have in place today. So this is a good delineation for the preparation. And then as far as the cost goes, the question about cost. So today, the funding itself is an allowable cost. So it can be included in your DoD contract bids. And there has been an authorization to actually issue funds through the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. So I can tell you that our team has actually utilized this capability in Maryland. So I highly recommend that if you have to get certified, that you do reach out to your local government, and then that would be at the state level for this Manufacturing Extension Partnership. And actually see if they can provide you with some sort of funding assistance, because we were able to get a significant amount of dollars to actually help fund this. And it's actually, they allow you to use the funds for various different areas, so that it's not very restrictive, as long as it's related to cybersecurity. And so someone had a question about costs, and we're happy to share these slides, by the way, afterwards. I know it's a little bit difficult to see. Let's see here. Narrow in on the costs.
So I would think, Carter, I mean, Marcel, I don't know if you have any feedback on this, but I would think that this is not going to amend your rates. It's just going to be essentially a one-time cost. It's what's a 3-year renewal certificate. So there would be a cost of getting certified the first time, or if you change from a level to another level. But it's not really going to be an ongoing cost associated with that.
Yeah, and since, are there any needs to amend the LCAT rates? I mean, today they're probably not going to do that, right? This is considered an allowable cost. So it's really what it ends up being is an overhead cost. I don't believe they're going to amend the LCAT rates for this specifically. If the question is, do we believe they should? I think that's a little bit of a question.
Yeah, right? There is a lot of discussion on it's the new cost of doing business. The government's kind of changing things now, but it's the kind of times we live in with the data security that you're required to do business.
Okay, I see a question from Diane. How accessible can this be accomplished for some that may wish to pursue this? Acceleration of the certification itself, Diane, is probably unlikely, just because there's still a lot of questions as to when they're going to officially roll this out or when you will start seeing it, right? And I believe, Paul, you mentioned that this is going to be to 2021, right?
So what I've been told by some contracting officers is that the first contracts to contain CMMC have been approved and will drop in the first quarter of 2021, yeah. And somebody even hinted it might be sooner than that, but I think you'd hear a lot of people cry foul. But it's definitely going to become more and more standard as the year goes on.
Right, and from a cost perspective as well, you can see here, we separated this out. This is estimated costs that were actually provided by the Defense Acquisition University. And so there is an assessment cost, right, depending on the level of the assessment itself. And it'll tell you how many unique entities are probably going to have to abide by this actual assessment. So you can see here the higher level assessments are significantly more pricey. But the basic assessments, which is where a lot of entities will actually end up being, is much more reasonably priced, right? And then if you actually go over to the estimated cost for the certification itself, and these are based over, it's an annual cost here over a 3-year period. You can see that there's average non-recurring costs for engineering and recurring costs for engineering. So it would be interesting to understand whether they would potentially raise the LCAT rates just out of the need for other people to even have a higher level of knowledge and understanding of what they're doing now, right? And having more responsibility tied to their security from a work perspective. Looks like we have another question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
What organization is over certification? Is there a good checklist to use? So I do a self-check before engaging a certification.
Yes. So CMMC AB, or the CMMC Accreditation Board, is the governing body, and they do have, there's a checklist, and then there's a light checklist, I think, that's kind of a quick review that you can go out there. Right now, it's still kind of developing. A lot of people are out there seeing, they're getting their certification to teach, and it's going to be kind of a new business model for them to get out there and work with these different companies. So you're going to be, in many cases, like Diane, if you're trying to get this done quick, you might be this customer or this group's first customer to get accredited. So you're going to probably be helping them develop their processes as well.
Right, and Paul, did you, so we also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the recent awards and some of the implications to the CMMC regarding these awards.
Sure, so I don't know if you want to go to that slide. Oh, let's see, it is, okay, sorry, my eyes aren't as good. So I got involved with the Smart Cities environment a couple of years ago. We did a smart base at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, and at that point in time, funding was really not set up, and the concept was kind of novel. But over the last couple of years, you've seen things come out where there's a huge infrastructure upgrade that the Air Force and Army are going through. with the base network. And you're seeing a lot of awards also that include 5G. So they're trying to come up into the very latest technologies. But specifically, Tyndall Air Force Base has said that they're going to be a smart base or a base of the future after they got devastated after the hurricane. And then Albany, U.S. Marine Corps Logistics Center in Albany, Georgia, was just awarded, or they just awarded a contract for some smart asset tracking. Miramar has some smart buildings. Miramar has some self-driving vehicles, autonomic vehicles. And then the Naval Support Base in San Diego has smart buildings. So you're seeing them incorporate these. And so when we start looking at how is CMMC going to be implemented in a smart city, we're starting to see some of the ways that it might be impacted in the future, because you've got all these data that's going to be traveling around and managed by these companies that have these contracts. How do they fit in there? And it's still to be seen. I see Alicia's doing some research for us.
Yes. Alicia is actually one of our great analyst who works directly with the Defense Acquisitions University. So she's been providing us with a lot of great info on the back end as well on this. Do we have any other questions or concerns? We really want to hear from you guys on what you're worried about and what you need to know about the CMMC at this point in time. Can you put your finger on how many folks are really interested in the program, just to see how much the security community is embracing it?
Are you talking about CMMC?
I think she is. Yes. Okay. So, that's a great question. I think that there's a lot of people, even if you just take to LinkedIn today, a lot of people that are involved. I wouldn't say that it's so much of an interest, but a significant concern now, right? Because there's a lot of new obstacles and hurdles that people are going to have to go through that they may not have previously have had to go through. And there have been a lot of questions around the acquisition or the AB, right? The actual board, and how they're going to roll this out and give the ability for people to implement this very quickly, as you mentioned, Diane, right? Because I think there will be a situation where there will be, as Paul mentioned, a very limited amount of resources to have these assessments done initially. And there will be a wait list to actually have your assessment done. And then how does that counterbalance with the amount of time that you have before you get onto a new contract or when you respond to an RFP? But Paul, I think you mentioned, when you and I were talking previously, you had mentioned that there is going to be some level of leeway, correct?
So there's been some discussion of the initial certification. If it would get pushed back, they've kind of said they're not going to push it back, but I think some people would like it to get pushed out. If they've got, let's say, a dozen contracts that are going to come out, at the beginning of the year, how many people are going to, or how many companies or organizations are going to be actually certified to be able to respond to those? So you've got that, in like going to your point, what's their time frame to get that completed? But the other thing was that since everybody's got to get certified at once in the beginning, there was some discussion as to whether it might be from a 3-year certification to a 5-year certification. Then that might be stretched out so that you can get everybody up to speed. And then once you got the ecosystem self-supporting itself, then it could become a rolling 3 years. There's a lot of things that are just kind of still being hashed out. And like Marcella said, go to LinkedIn or Google CMMC. There's a lot of articles. There's a lot of people that are not happy with it. There's a lot of people saying it should have happened a long time ago. A lot of people that think that NIST should have been enforced the way it is without having a new accreditation board. There's still a lot of a very active community. And Diane, I know a lot of people are trying to figure it out. They have to do it. They don't have a choice. So if you're going to be in that space, and there may be companies that choose not to pursue federal business because of it, but I think that what's going to happen is within a few years, it's probably going to seep into the commercial world. You're going to have these standards, and you're going to have to be you have to defend yourself if you go to court. And so if you have a level of certification that the federal government requires, what better defense than that, right?
Right. And I think that this is really important, right? So this slide is very important because you can see here, Diane, to your point, you can see here from a preparation perspective, where should you really be thinking and focusing, right? So if you already know what level you're going to fall into at a minimum, then you can start preparing by really understanding the documentation that's already available out there. So I can give you our own personal example from our organization, right? We've already started going through the implementation of NIST 800-171. We started getting our own internal assessments so that we can be prepared. And so if you start this process ahead of time and if you're proactive about it, then there's a good chance when it comes time to your assessment and your accreditation process, you will be a lot further ahead than many of the others, right? So one of the poll questions that I wanted to bring up here, what is your biggest concern about getting certified, right? And it's funny because it seems to be pretty even across the board here. The five options here were cost, not passing the certification, maintaining the certification, resources to support the process, and then resources to sustain the security strategy, right? And there's literally, everybody has picked one at one point in time. So the concerns are across the board pretty broad, and I think everyone is feeling the pain. So I think the first one with cost, as I mentioned, go out and see if you can work with the government to get some support in funding. Prepare for that allowable cost ahead of time. Be prepared ahead of time with that funding. Know that that's going to be something you're going to have to pay for. Not passing the certification, again, I would say look at this slide, identify which level you fall into, and then start running through all of this documentation and understanding what your process is going to be so that you can be prepared to pass the certification. And that does mean that you may have to, come out of pocket to implement some new security capabilities and features. I know that for us, that was definitely the case. Maintaining the certification over the long run. Paul, do you have any insight on that as far as?
No, I don't. I think the hope is, and it's like with all security, right? The hope is that you bake it into your process. So when you're getting new tools, when you're getting new processes, that security is at the ground level of what you're doing. So I know like a few years ago, the Air Force had to change their process because they found out that they were adding security after the fact. And a lot of that deals with some of the stuff that had been around for a long time. We see this in like some commercial areas as well, where you have data equipment that predates the internet. So how do you make it secure when you connect it? So what they're doing now is they're starting to say, okay, everything cyber is part of the recipe for when they roll something out. And so I think part of the CMMC process is saying, okay, when you do business, how do you address security? So if you're getting a new business, you're getting a new, a new platform or whatever product you're launching, how is it baked in there? And so I think it's just going to change, or it should change the way you do some of the business here in your processes.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that policy, right? Policy is super important here. And I can tell you, that was one of the things that we had to address internally as well, is starting to make sure that all of our policy was properly aligned with the expectations of the CMMC.
Right.
Resources to support the process. This is a good one just because you'll hear a lot of people. My favorite thing is when people are like, oh, we're CMMC subject matter experts, right? Or like, we're the center of excellence for this. I've seen a few of these like .coms and .org, all kinds of organizations coming up talking about how they're experts in something that doesn't really fully exist yet. So I would just say from a support perspective, just be mindful of, working with anyone who claims to be an expert on this, just because it's really difficult to become an expert when there's not really a fully fledged, implementation plan yet for the CMMC itself. But instead focus, as I said, right? I mean, if you keep your mind on focusing on getting good assessors in to just assess your environment, developing a strong security strategy, and making sure that you're implementing the controls that already exist out there that will be associated with the CMMC itself, then you're already going to be ahead of the game from a lot of the other people out there, or organizations out there, right? And so my recommendation would be, because it says here, the other one is resources to support the sustained security strategy. if you know you're going to have to, have some sort of sustained level of operations, whether it be detection and monitoring, or maybe your organization is very small and you don't even have a CISO in your organization, then I would definitely suggest that you go out and you work with a managed service provider that could provide you with some virtual CISO services, help you get a strategy in place, help you get some of those assessments, and work with third-party providers to get your security operations. If this isn't something that you plan on doing in-house, or you're worried that you just won't be able to maintain it across time in-house.
And I don't know if Diane, I don't know if any organizations are fully certified yet. I know they've had several companies go through the program to kind of test the process out, and to see what that might look like. I want to say it was Hewlett Packard, but I'm not positive, that they wanted to do like the first kind of large company to do it, and they volunteered to participate. But like Marcella said, this is brand new, so it's still being processed and rolled out. It's going to drive. I mean, you're seeing, and to Bill's question, you're seeing people that are already putting themselves out there as specialists, and certainly you can come across as a specialist if you're aware and involved with this. It's kind of like any kind of security. If you ask the right questions, you can find out some really scary details. And if that's something, if you're asking if you're going to look for that business, might be a good place to get in. But there certainly is a lot of companies and organizations that are now putting themselves out there to become certifying agencies.
Right, and as of right now, as we mentioned, there's only a few people that are actually working through the CMMC, right, to become auditors and assessors of all of this. So I would definitely say that you should, if you're looking to get an assessment specifically, go to the links that we provided here. Those are really the only people who are accredited or officially directly supporting the CMMC. However, if you're really just looking to get prepared, because that's really all you can do at this point is start to prepare, then it's really whatever security professional or service providers are able to support you through all of these other implementations and guidances, right? So the NIST, as we already mentioned, DFARS and the CFR, and then for the higher levels where it gets a little bit more involved, the NIST 800-172. And I think that's our time, right?
Have we gotten a note yet? Are there any other questions? I don't see anybody giving us the hook yet.
No, we haven't gotten the look. Alicia, since we have you in the chat, anything else you want to add as well? All right, that may take her a little bit of time.
Yeah.
But regardless, you're welcome to come see us at Digital Lantern, our booth. I'm sure Paul can also be helpful if needed.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information that's on LinkedIn. Katie Arrington is one of the ladies that's heading it up and has been spearheading this for the government. She's very active on LinkedIn and provides good resources. It's interesting space.
Yeah, and I think if you want to hear more about just what's going on, right, and you are on LinkedIn, there are hashtags. There's the CMMC hashtag, CMMCAB. It's a weird way, I guess, to kind of do business from a LinkedIn perspective. But if you look up those hashtags, I promise you will start to see all kinds of information on there. As Paul mentioned, you can follow Katie, who's the CISO at the DoD. She's always putting out information, and she should be providing probably the highest level of information, right, as the CISO of the DoD. So that's where you can get your good information from, as opposed to relying on some of the other folks that claim to be experts right now. Because
honestly, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Paul.
No, I'll just say honestly, Katie is a true advocate, right? She really believes in the cause of protecting the government's data and the people that work with the government, because it's not just data for the customer. You're looking at data for your business as well. So if you meet those standards, then everybody should be safe.
All right.
Let's see.
Any other questions from the group?
So from the group, when you guys are doing your security assessments as a company today, taking out the CMMC. What standards are you guided by? I know there's NIST that's out there. There's also ISO. Are y'all certified today, or is it we think we're good? Kind of hoping somebody would answer that. Oh, mostly NIST. Okay.
All right. Well, I can provide you guys with a summary here, right, at a minimum, for the discussion. Okay, mostly NIST. Do certs help avoid lengthy RFPs? I think, I mean, Paul, do you have any insight on that? Whether, like, you mean not certified with the CMC? Okay, so are you, Diane, is your question whether other certifications or accreditations would help avoid the RFP process?
I think the answer to that's going to be no. I mean, you're going to have to do this, and the RFP process. I mean, there are some ways you can short circuit. One of the ones that I think it was Miramar was actually awarded as a sole source because they had experience that the DoD determined other companies didn't have. So it's nice if you're in an area that other people are not. But CMMC is going to be table stakes. So everybody's going to have it. And you won't be able to get any award without it.
Yeah. So Diane, to answer your question more directly, it doesn't cut down on the RFP. What it will do is basically give you a leg up if you are CMMC certified already, right? Because they will only be awarding contracts to those who are CMMC certified, or to my understanding have already, right now, I think that the leeway they're providing is people who have already self-accredited and have an implementation plan to get CMMC certified. So it won't cut down on the RFP process, but there may be a chance that if you are certified, you will have an upper hand to an organization that is not yet certified.
All right, and it also might help you because if you go into the RFP and you're certified already, it's going to give you, going back to it's baked in there, right? You already know the processes, you already know what you've got. Whereas if you don't have the certification, you may need to go in there and do some work to see what level of certification you have, or what you've got to do. And so doing that certification ahead of time will give you a greater knowledge when you start working on the RFP. Did everybody answer the questions?
All right, I'm not seeing Kenny here, so I think if do we have more questions?
And Diane, I know so with my work with FCA, and FCA is a nonprofit that does things that they bring DoD, commercial institutions or corporations and learning institutions together in kind of a thought leading environment. So they have a lot of sessions out there on a variety of topics, and you're seeing some of them on CMMC. We did one of these in Atlanta. It's on our Atlanta YouTube channel. If you want to go out there, it was given by the CTO of the Federal Space for Hewlett Packard, and they kind of walk through the history of it. And you can see, even that was 2 months ago. Even the last 2 months, you've seen some changes to how this is going to be incorporated.
Right. So I think the summary here is that you know, if you're going to if you have a DoD contract or you intend on bidding on any DoD contracts, this will apply to you specifically starting next year. You will have to go through third-party audits and assessments, and basically, it's going to be dependent on what your level of certification is, what you will need to implement, and we can expect these starting 2021. Compliance expenses are going to be allowable. Again, as I mentioned, reach out to your state government to see if you can get some support and funding with this one. If you're a subcontractor, talk to your prime contracts to understand how they're addressing this, to see if there's going to be some support coming from the prime contractor on this. And then again, you know, the certification right now is said to be good for 3 years, but potentially 5 years just because of the level of efforts that are required. And if you guys have more questions or you want to continue to discuss it, as I mentioned, you're welcome to come by our booth later and we can continue having discussions about this. And I think you can also reach out to Paul. He's very well versed in this as well. And yeah, we're happy to continue to help.
No, so I don't know if they forgot about us or anything. Our session was supposed to end a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
So, and for those that are still in here with us, we appreciate it. But there is the live keynote is going on at this point in time. So if you want to stay and talk, you can. If you want to go check out the keynote, you won't hurt our feelings.
What kind of funding is really needed? So I'll actually pull back up to that slide for you, Diane, since you're still here, and I know you probably have lots of questions about this. And this may be a little bit difficult for you to see. So Diane, depending on what level of certification, you can see here from an annual cost perspective, the assessments themselves actually have a cost associated with them. On the higher end of the assessments, you're looking anywhere like from $16,000 annually to maybe a little bit more. And this is broken down by annual cost per entity, right? So it's divided by 3 from the original cost assessment here. And then the estimated cost for the certification itself is broken down by the levels on the right-hand side. So you should be able to see there what the total annual cost would be. So for example, for an organization that is at a level 3, the expected annual cost could be up to about $60,000, right? So that's not chump change, obviously, for a small business, for example. So that could be a significant implication for you. Now, what I would say is there are definitely ways that you can get resourceful about doing the actual implementation, right, of the CMMC, because we're talking here costs for assessments, and then also recurring costs, right? So what are the recurring costs overall that we may see? And this could include, monitoring and detection services or implementing new devices and appliance. You can see here recurring engineering costs. So there are definitely ways that you can start to become resourceful about identifying how to apply some of these actual components of the different methodologies that are being used. So for example, you may need to implement new firewalls, or you may need to have new hardware or software. There are options out there, right? You're not just bound to one option necessarily. There are lists that if you work with the Department of Defense, they provide you with lists of options of potential appliances and services that you can utilize. So I would definitely say just do a lot of your homework ahead of time and look into what is going to be needed from your side. Start to put together that sheet for costs on your own to see what the band is for your organization, because it could be significantly lower or it could be higher, just depending on who and what you're purchasing for what services and products, right?
And it also depends on what kind of business you're in.
That's very true. That's very true. And so that's been our approach as well, right? It's basically when we are helping organizations try to identify how to implement some of the NIST 800, for example, that's kind of where we've been providing some assistance with this, is in the preparation process. It's really important to understand what your business is, really categorizing the assets that are in your environment, because that's really what's going to drive how you apply some of these implementations. And so, as Paul said, knowing your business and what is critical to your business when you're working with the Department of Defense is going to make a significant difference on how you implement this.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at security, it's best practices, right? So there's not a silver bullet that's going to take care of everything, but it says, are you aware of the threats to your business, and how are you addressing the threats that are out there? And there can be a variety of ways of doing it. You just have to have it documented. It has to be a good solution. I have had customers when I was at AT&T that would tell me that they had insurance for cybersecurity, and they didn't really need to worry about it too much. And that's actually not the case. You have to implement some security protocols. In fact, if you don't do that, it invalidates your insurance. You need to read the policy. There's been a number of news articles where people have gotten much less they thought they were going to get.
That's a great point, right? I was actually having this discussion recently as well, because there's a lot of news articles coming out about how the US government is now going to fine organizations that pay ransomware to sanctioned criminals, right?
I did see that, yeah.
So, this isn't directly CMMC related, but as Paul said, a lot of people are very heavily reliant on that insurance policy kicking in. And the truth is now, even if you pay out the ransom through your insurance policy, you're still going to get hit with more fines by the government for actually paying that out. And now this is something that insurances that I think at one point were actually saying like, hey, we'll pay out the ransomware for you, are having to take into consideration. The other thing is having insurance is great. But again, as Paul said, just like with car insurance or, property insurance, there are terms and conditions associated with it. And so if you're not falling within those terms and conditions, then you very well may not get that insurance payout. So another thing that I think is really beneficial for organizations is to actually collect your logs and have your logs readily available, because those logs will be your evidence or your support through that insurance process. And even through some of the processes for these implementations, right? You're going to need to have those logs to prove what you're collecting, what you're supporting, what use cases for the implementation you already have in place. So that's a really good place to start from a technical perspective. And I'm happy to have conversations about more like the technical implementations of how to do this if you guys want to chat later through networking or through the expo booths.
And I think that's really, one of the things that I saw a while back, and it was somebody from Secret Service was talking about security and your data points. And he said, doesn't really matter what number you put on it, what dollar sign you put on it. He's like, any number you put on it will scare you. The volume is what drives this. And you look at the data that you're collecting every day and the amount of stuff that just goes through and just sits wherever you store it. He said those numbers will, it's something like 70% of all businesses that are hit by cyber attack close within a year. It's a pretty significant event. So CMMC, I think, is really a good kind of stake in the ground for the federal government to start things moving forward. We'll see how the rocky road goes next year, when it actually starts getting implemented and where it goes from there. All
right. I think we have about 5 minutes before everybody has to actually get to the next sessions, right? So are you good to wrap this up, Paul? Do we have any final?
I am. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Marcella.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And come talk to us more, connect with us, and let us know if we can provide you with any more information. Bye.
Have a great day.